Hi everyone, this is Aaron for Tippy and Tricky, and today we are going to check what are the requirements for installing the Android IDE. So the first one we are going to check is what is the supporting environment for Android app development. When it comes to Windows XP or later version would be necessary to develop an Android application. So that is for installing the Android IDE, you need at least Windows XP or later version. And for Mac, so it is Mac OS X 10.5.8 or later version with the Intel chip. So the Mac machines like Mac desktop or laptops comes with three processors. Hopefully one of them is Intel processor. So whichever machine that comes with Intel chip processor and a Mac OS X of 10.5.8 or later version, that is I believe 10.5.8 is a Yosemite version, so I'm not sure about it. The next one is with Linux. So Linux including GNUC library 2.7 or later version. So on installing the Linux OS, you need to add a particular add-on named GNUC library 2.7 or later version for developing the Android application with an Android IDE. So now we are going to check what are the different Android IDEs that is available to develop the Android application. So when it comes to AIDE, so AIDE is a Android IDE. So and this IDE is used to develop the Android application using the HTML5, C and C++. So you can use any one of these languages to develop the Android IDE. The link is provided in the third column to download that particular IDE. The second one would be your Android Studio. So in Android Studio, you can use Java as a supportive language to develop the Android application. Then comes Application Craft Basic for Android, Cordova, Corona, Eclipse with ADT plugin. So these are some IDEs where you use different languages to develop the Android application. So Cordova here, the Cordova which is used to develop a hybrid app. So you can develop a hybrid app using this Cordova IDE. So on the link to download the Cordova IDE is given in this link. Okay. So Eclipse with ADT plugin. So this is also one of the familiar IDE that is used, that is recommended by Google earlier. The next comes Intel SDK, which supports HTML5 language and Kiwi MAT app inverter. So MAT app inventor is IDE. So where you can build the apps using blocks and you can specify algorithms to what the Android app must do. So nearly it has 3 million downloads when you check out this particular link. Then comes Monkey X, Monogame, Mosync, NS Basic. So you can also develop Android application using the basic language. So whichever supportive language is given as HTML5, so that IDEs are used to develop the Android application. So what we call it as hybrid apps. So any app developed using this HTML5, CSS, JavaScript can be used as a hybrid app. So what is a hybrid app? So hybrid app is, on developing this hybrid app, you can install that particular app in any of the devices like Android. You can install that app in Android and also in iOS and Windows OS if necessary. So one app that fits all the devices. That's what we call it as hybrid app. Okay, so phone gap also is one of a familiar hybrid app application IDE. So you can create some games using this phone gaps. Most probably they would be using JavaScript to develop the two-dimensional games in this particular phone gap. So what are the different Android IDE? Last section is RFO basic, RHO mobile shoot, Telebrick, Titanium. The last one is Xamarin. So RHO mobile shoot uses Ruby as the supporting language to develop the Android application. The last one, Xamarin, is also one of the familiar IDE, which uses C Sharp as a supportive language to develop the Android application. So out of this, out of all this IDEs, you can use any IDE you are comfortable with. But what is Google recommended IDE and which IDE is most commonly used? At present, Android Studio is the IDE recommended by Google. So as far as now, Android applications are developed using this Android Studio. What is the IDE available before Android Studio? So Eclipse IDE with ADT plugin. So Eclipse IDE, when it comes to Eclipse IDE, so this Eclipse IDE is most probably used to develop the Java based applications. So when you add this ADT plugin, so Android Developer Tools plugin, you get the environment to develop the mobile based application. So Eclipse IDE supports Java and this ADT plugin, Android Developer Tools plugin, supports mobile environment. So that is, if you use SDK and AVD managers, if you install both things, so you can use this ADT plugin to integrate those softwares or medium. So these are two commonly used IDE nowadays. So Android Studio is used nowadays. So in the earlier stage, Google supports this Eclipse IDE with ADT plugin. The next one is, what is the minimum operating system requirements for Android Studio? So once again, when it comes to Windows, you need at least Windows 7 or later versions. It can be of 32 or 64-bit. Obviously, Windows XP is not supported to install the Android Studio. When it comes to Mac, so this Android Studio, you have to at least have the OS X version of 10.10, that is Yosemite version or higher, so up to 10.12, that is Mac OS Sierra. When it comes to Linux, you need to have some graphical oriented desktop operating system, that is in Linux. The Linux operating system supports both character user interface and also the graphical user interface. You should have a OS version that supports graphical user interface, that can be of anything. So GNOME or KDE desktop. So what are the minimum hardware requirements for this particular Android Studio? So you must have RAM of 3 GB RAM minimum. That is minimum requirement. So you must at least have 3 GB RAM to install and run the Android Studio IDE. What is the recommended RAM size? So this Android Studio IDE team recommends at least 8 GB in your machine for running this Android Studio with top performing thing. So plus you need 1 GB for the Android emulator. So Android emulator is so what we call it as Android Virtual Device Manager. Where do you run your application whichever you have created using Android? So the Android application whichever is created is run through this Android emulator. So you need some special 1 GB for this Android emulator. The next one comes the drive space. So 2 GB of available disk space minimum. So this is the minimum requirement, but 4 GB is recommended. 500 MB for the IDE and 1.5 GB for Android SDK and emulator system image. And this emulator system image is what we create in the Android Studio. So the emulator which we create to run our Android application. So that one we call it as emulator system image. Obviously, it can be of any OS image. So suppose if I need to run um, applications that is developed using Marshmallow, so I need to have an emulator that supports Marshmallow operating system. So to support that Marshmallow operating system, you at least need Marshmallow's system image, which can be installed using the Android SDK. So you need at least 500 MB for the IDE. So you need Android Studio IDE to be installed using this 500 MB and at least minimum requirement of 1.5 GB for the Android SDK. This SDK can be installed with any one version. So later on you have to install the other versions too. So each versions may take up space to 1 GB. So you need at least more than 4 GB to install all the versions. When you install all the versions from Nougat to Jelly Bean, you need at least a disk space of 10 GB. So what about the screen resolution? When it comes to screen resolution, you need at least 1280 into 800 minimum screen resolution to have this Android Studio IDE. So other software requirements for Android Studio. What are the other software requirements after we after or before we install the Android Studio? So definitely you need to have a Java development kit. So that is JDK, 8 versions, at least 8 version. Then an SDK, so which is a medium where you can download all the versions that you need to create. Next one is a small node. So this two thing, Java development kit and software development kit, is can be installed when you download the Android Studio bundle. If you install the Android Studio bundle, this two recommended Java versions and SDK versions is installed automatically using this Android Studio bundle. So it's a kind of bundle where you have IDE, JDK and SDK. SDK contains the AVD manager also, Android Virtual Device Manager. So before section we have seen the Android emulator. So that one we call it as Android Virtual Device Manager. So using this Android Virtual Device Manager, you can create a emulator of your own choice. What is the minimum operating system requirements for Eclipse with ADT plugin? So this is the secondary IDE nowadays because Android Studio is more widely used than this particular Eclipse with ADT plugin. So Google has obviously stopped this Eclipse with ADT plugin support, and they are trying to promote the Android Studio, and whatever future they are including is only available through Android Studio. So better you can, it's the right time to switch over from Android Eclipse with ADT plugin to Android Studio. But for the sake of people who is using RAM size of below 2 GB or sorry RAM size of 2 GB, you can still use this Eclipse with ADT plugin to develop your Android application. But the recommended IDE would be Android Studio. Okay, so when it comes to Windows, you must have at least Windows XP or later version. When it comes to Mac, you should need at least OS X version of 10.4.9. That is the version before Yosemite and later versions. When it comes to Linux, you must have Ubuntu, Red Hat and others. Obviously, whichever operating system that supports character user interface, you can use that particular operating system in Linux. So what is the minimum hardware requirements for Eclipse with ADT plugin? When it comes to RAM size, you need at least 2 GB RAM to the minimum and 4 GB RAM is recommended. I would suggest that 2 GB is more to run this Eclipse with ADT plugin. You don't even know if you are having 4 GB RAM, then you would have a better performance. But 2 GB is obviously more enough to install this Eclipse with ADT plugin and use it for Android development. You must have a drive space of 2 GB of available disk space, that is minimum, and 4 GB is recommended. So once again, this is for only for the installation of Eclipse SDK, Eclipse and SDK. So when you install all the other versions, like if you want to create a app using Marshmallow, you must have a Marshmallow and other versions. You must have at least 10 GB of disk space to install all the versions and their system image. So this system image is used in your Android emulator. Okay. The next one is processor. Must have at least dual core plus and 86 only. That is for Mac. So when it comes to Macs, once again, you must have at least the Intel chip, the desktop or laptop with Intel chip. So other software requirements for Eclipse. So when you install the Eclipse alone, you would be able to run only the Java based applications. So what you must install with this Eclipse? First, first of all, JDK is important for both IDEs, any kind of IDEs which uses Java as the supportive language. JDK is more important, so that must be a mandatory one. So is that is installed first. Later on, whichever IDE you prefer, you can install that IDE. So the next one is software development kit. Obviously, you can get the latest version from the Google Developer Console page for the latest SDK. So using this SDK manager, you can install different kind of APIs using this SDK. That is, you can install all the SDK platform and system image for the versions you are going to develop your Android application. So we can have some detailed information about this SDK and system image in later point. So after the installation of JDK and SDK, you need the Android developer tools. So this is ADT is a plugin that is released by the Google. You must have to install this ADT plugin in the Eclipse IDE. So I will just tell you how to install this ADT plugin. And the last one is Note. So ADT bundle is available, and the latest bundle to download this particular ADT bundle is provided here, and the last release date would be 02/07/2014. And obviously you can use this for 32-bit Windows OS. So all the links for IDE and ADT bundle will be provided in the video description mentioned below. So this ADT bundle has the SDK and Eclipse with ADT plugin pre-installed. Actually, this zip contains SDK pre-installed and Eclipse with ADT plugin already available. So what you have to do is you just have to download this particular zip file, which would be around less than 500 MB. After downloading this, you just need to extract it and open the Eclipse IDE as such. You don't have to install any other thing. That is, you don't have to install the SDK or the Eclipse with ADT plugin. The ADT plugin which is installed in Eclipse. So if you like this video, please subscribe. Until then, signing off. Aaron for TPN Freaky.